Hello, and welcome to the Faith Science Podcast. My name is Tyler Bublitz, and welcome back to the Reign of Christ Sunday, or Christ the King Sunday, for the week of November 24th, 2024. I'm excited to have you here. I'm excited to begin this week's podcast, and I'm excited. Here we are at the last Sunday of Year B of the church year. We are just about to celebrate the new year and start Advent all over again as we move into the cycle. And as I've kind of talked about before, as we get toward the end of Advent and we move into the Christmas season, that's right around the birthday of the podcast, so I'll have a special episode coming up then. But it's an exciting time of year, it's a busy time of year, but it's also a time of year where now we are here at the end of what we have gone through the last year with Mark. Let us reflect, gather, think about how much we've grown this year. Think about how we've continued to move forward this year. Think about all the different things we've had to endure and go through, the highs and the lows. I think this is a good moment to be able to take in all that, and the text kind of played to that in a certain way as well. And I think there are certain things that definitely get highlighted this week that help bring that point home a little bit further. But let's look back to last week's Twitter question, which was, are you letting yourself be challenged both personally and spiritually? And that kind of plays into what I was talking about. As we are here at the end of the church year, I think it is a really good moment to think about that and to ponder that as we go through different phases of life, as we continue to move through life. This is something that we should be working on consistently. We should be thinking about, how are we being challenged? How are we growing? How are we moving forward? What is this phase of life? What am I going through? I know in my own professional life, there's been definitely different phases as I'm slowly figuring out where in the world I'm supposed to be. There is times and seasons and all these things of that nature. And if we aren't reflecting on that and going through that within faith, when are we going to do this? And it's really easy for us to get to the end of things and then kind of be like, well, what did I do? And I think this is a practice, especially as we are heading into that last little bit of the year. I think it is a really good practice to be going in. And I think the church can help us in this way by wrapping up the church year a little bit early and getting us into that mindset of thinking about that. So let's just jump into it this week. One of the Old Testament texts that you have to choose from is from 2 Samuel chapter 23, the first 7 verses of it. And these are the words of David as he's kind of wrapping up his life, his last words, and talking about how God has been this rock for Israel, and remembering that this is the beginning of what God has promised. This is not the end. And it's continuing to making sure that we are locked in with God. We are in lockstep, and that in that we are able to recognize that God will continue to provide and guide us through that, and is going to help us get around some of the hardships of this life as long as we are continuing to walk with God. The psalm that goes with that is Psalm 132, the first 12 verses, and then optionally 13 to 18. And this picks up a little bit more off of what David has been talking about, that we have to remember back all the different things that we have gone through as a people with God, the hardships, the things that have been difficult, and recognizing that God has been with us and dwelling with us, that God is with us in our resting places, and recognizing that, acknowledging that, recognizing that we are the servant, that we should be obeying what God is calling us to do, and continuing to be that joyful servant and being able to joyfully listen and live out the decrees of what the Lord is calling us to be through the rest of our lives. And welcoming Christ into these different places within our lives, and welcoming the Spirit of the Lord to be within us and dwell within us and be able to be that lamp to guide us through the hardships that'll come and through the high times that come as well. The other Old Testament text this week is out of Daniel chapter 7, verses 9 and 10 and 13 and 14. This is a text that's going through and recognizing how God is over it all, and recognizing that there is the power that God has, and yet continues to watch over us and is taking care of us. But it's us to remember that dominion of this whole place is God's, that God is the one who is over all of it, not us. The psalm that goes with that is Psalm 93, all 5 verses of it. And this plays into that theme as well, the majesty, the lordship, the kingship of God. And remember, the people that we're talking to originally with these recognize and understand that kingly model really well. But this ruler, this person who is over everything, and yet has control over all of this, and yet then this is something that we need to be worthy of praise, and recognizing how God in that position continues to make sure that things are moving in a good and efficient way for all of us. The epistle text or New Testament text this week is out of Revelation chapter 1, verses 4b to 8. This is recognizing that Jesus Christ then is at the right hand of God and was there for us that we would be humbled. That Christ came and died for our sins and took that on our behalf. And recognizing that that was able to elevate us. And in doing that, it's also the recognition of Christ doing that was also God, the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, being able to separate God's self to be able to go through that for us. This recognition of what Christ was willing to do for us to be able to bring all of us together. And the gospel text this week is out of John, chapter 18, verses 33 through 37. This is Pilate talking with Jesus during the crucifixion week here, and Pilate then going through the question, "Are you King of the Jews?" And Jesus responding, "Do you ask this on your own, or did others tell you about me?" Pilate then kind of responds in a way that you can tell Pilate doesn't necessarily fully get what Jesus is getting at. "I am not a Jew, am I? Your own nation and the chief priests have handed you over to me. What have you done?" Jesus then responds, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom belonged to this world, my followers would be fighting to keep me from being handed over to the King of the Jews. But this is my kingdom is not from here." And Pilate just still isn't getting it. "So are you a king?" And Jesus responds with, "You say that I am a king, for I was born, and for this I came into the world to testify to the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice." And this is unfortunately where they cut us off a little bit earlier, where Pilate gets into what is truth. This whole discussion of Jesus looking at a much broader and bigger picture than what Pilate can at this particular moment, I think illustrates a lot of times where we're at, especially at the end of the church year, and trying to think and reflect and recognize where we are within our life's journey and where God is calling us. It's so easy for us to be like Pilate and be very consumed in this moment. And I think it allows for actually a very human interaction here that's very relatable, as Pilate unintentionally makes it extremely relatable to us in the here and now based off of these questions and getting into these hardships and recognizing that God is looking at something much bigger than a lot of times we're able to allow ourselves to look at. So before we jump into how faith and science come together this week, we have to do our shameless plugs for Working Preacher. If you haven't checked out Working Preacher, I'd highly recommend it. Between their Sermon Brainwaves podcasts or commentaries or discussions, since I'm not an ordained minister, I use them on a weekly basis to help give me some ideas, directions. There's a lot of great resources over there, and if you haven't checked that resource out, I'd highly recommend it. I'd also highly recommend checking out the Revised Common Lectionary coming from Vanderbilt Student Library. They not only have the text laid out week to week, but they also have some great art, prayers, hymns, colors, daily devotions, a lot of great resources over there. I really enjoy using them week to week. I really enjoy how they lay out the text. I really enjoy being able to use this resource to help give me some different ideas and direction for these texts. As we are trying to prepare for the week after week, these are great resources to be checking out. So if you haven't checked out the Revised Common Lectionary coming from Vanderbilt Student Library, I'd highly recommend that. Finally, I'd also recommend checking out the Green Blades Preaching Roundtable and the Green Blades Rising publication. This is either a weekly reflection or a monthly newsletter that goes into ecological echoes, implications, and urgencies within weekly preaching, along with being able to take in a lot of these other broader concepts and thinking about different ways in which we can impact. If you enjoy listening to this podcast week after week for a half an hour, I know you're going to enjoy these resources. I've enjoyed these resources, so I'd highly recommend checking them out, and those will be the first links down in the show notes. This week we're going to talk about an experiment that I remember really being exposed to when I was in high school with a psychology experiment. And this psychology experiment happened in the late 90s. And it's kind of a famous experiment. As I probably explain it, some of you will probably remember it and probably have seen it. But I think it illustrates really well how all of this comes together and works. And I think it really illustrates well what Christ and Pilate were getting at unintentionally. So the experiment is called the Invisible Gorilla. And it's this experiment that is published on YouTube, and it'll be one of the links down in the show notes, talking about selective attention. And this is a psychology term where selective attention is that we're focusing on a task while ignoring others. So in the video, you have this video of people in a room, and you're told to count how many times people in white shirts pass a basketball. And so there's people in black who are walking around, there's people in white, and they're moving and passing the ball around, and you are focused on counting that. At the end, it asks how many passes were there, and you feel accomplished. And the question then comes up of, did you see the gorilla? And you're like, what do you mean? I didn't see a gorilla. I was focused on counting the passes, which is what you told me to do. And no, there were people in black, but there was no gorilla. And if you watch the video back, yes, there was a gorilla that walked across the screen and even was in the middle and pounds his chest and moves on, and you completely missed it. A person in a gorilla suit. And this is an experiment that was done by Christopher Chabas and Daniel Simmons. And it was talked about when he was talking at Google years later about how as they've kind of continued this has been something that has been done multiple times in other ways. There's one with people and a woman with an umbrella walking through in the 70s where it kind of proved this. And the Invisible Gorilla was just trying to do it a little bit more modern and see if it was still the same result. And they've done it where they've had eye tracking, where people's eyes are actually locked in on the gorilla and they see the gorilla, but they don't necessarily recognize what is going on and say they never saw it. It explains this whole phenomenon of selective looking that can happen. And the selective attention of focusing on a specific stimulus and ignoring others is what is going on here. You have unintentional blindness where we're failing to see something in our own line of sight. And this plays into even our modern day life. And Chavez brought this up of how the illusion of attention, where when we're driving in the car and we're have something on our phones and, oh yeah, I'm familiar, I'm sure I can drive here and I can still do this quick thing on my phone. Yet it's this whole belief that we'll be okay, but yet when we look at how much slower our reaction times and different things of that are, we are actually missing things and we don't recognize it. It's the whole backseat driver, the person sitting next to you and saying, did you see that whole thing going on in our own life? It brings forth this whole idea of how present in certain ways are we actually within our own lives. And it gets to this whole premise of, if we were able to absorb everything all the time, the amount of processing power, to put it into more of like a computer term, would just be tremendous. And it would be so hard for us to be able to process absolutely everything that is going on. Our brain intentionally is being able to focus on certain things while ignoring others on purpose, so that we are able to continue to strive toward different goals. Well, in that, it makes it really easy for us to miss things. It's really easy for us, and I've talked about in years past, missing the minute details of what is going on in our world and looking at things and really being able to focus in and getting down to the small level. But let's back away a little bit. When we start thinking about things in broader senses, bigger senses, the body of Christ, the universe scale, we often miss things, and we start recognizing how things that are big deals to us are really, in the scheme of things, actually quite small. And when we realize this and start thinking about this, that we really are kind of stuck as human beings in between the macro and the seeing the beauty of the finite details of what God has designed and done. And we're not far enough back to be able to really see what all God is doing at times. Or we don't allow ourselves to step back to try to see what is all going on. It's a difficult place to be, where we sit in the middle of this, trying to grapple with and understand where in the world is God doing, and it's oftentimes that we aren't far enough back to really be able to see. And I would argue that part of this also plays into the aspect of our world keeps trying to move faster. There's things that are happening faster. We feel like we have more and more things on our schedule. Things are filling up faster. We need to do things quicker. And thus it makes it harder for us to actually step back and observe. Step back and actually see what is going on. What we see here with Pilate kind of questioning Jesus, Pilate is focused on the specific situation of what is going on. Jesus knows this is part of something much bigger than this moment. Pilate is focused on the moment, this week, what is all going on that week, and is trying to keep the peace, trying not to get things too stirred up, trying to keep tempers down. Jesus is looking at eternity. Two very different scales. Jesus is understanding this is so much bigger, and that the people at this moment just cannot see beyond this moment. They're caught up in it. And thus we get things like from the book of Revelation talking about recognizing what Christ did for all of us and for all time. Recognizing that we have this God who is in charge, who is trying to rule over everything and to pay homage to. Recognizing and remembering back to what all Christ has done is so important then, because it is from that we are able to actually see and understand. It is easy in this world to be caught up counting how many times people are passing the basketball in white shirts, and in trying to ignore all the people in black shirts, and to the point where we miss a gorilla, which could have been very funny because we were so focused on one thing. And I think in certain ways, we all at times get so caught up into certain aspects of life that we miss what we don't expect so much that then what happens is we aren't actually seeing God. Because God is what we are expecting to see. We are expecting to see God in specific ways that fit within our schedule, how we are seeing things. So when God does something unexpected, we either don't see it or we're caught so off guard that we can't get our head around it. Instead of being able to enjoy the humor and in being able to enjoy the spontaneity, being able to enjoy who God is, we instead start getting mad at God because God didn't fit into our box, except that we're the ones who have a box and God's saying, I don't fit in that box. We are at the end of this year B of the lectionary. We are at the end of this. And I think this is why I kind of keep coming back around to this question of how have we grown? What have we learned? If we are followers of Christ and we are trying to be part of this bigger picture, be part of this bigger body, we need to be able to take these moments to reflect. And it's kind of funny because now, as we are moving into the beginning of year C, moving into Advent, anybody who works in a church will tell you it's one of the busiest times of year. And yet, what is Advent really about? Reflecting, pausing, preparing, contemplating still. It's funny to me, having worked in the church, where the two busiest times of year for Easter and Christmas, the seasons before them are supposed to be about preparing and reflecting and getting ready. And yet we move so fast because there's so much that we got to get done. And We become Marthas instead of being Marys and sitting at the feet of Jesus. As we are at the end of this year, we should reflect. We should take a moment to breathe. We should think about what we've gone through. We should think about, where did we see God this year? How is God moving this year? Where in the relationship do things need to get better? Where are things now that I can see that the gorilla walked through, but I didn't see it at the first time through? I was so focused on this that I completely missed this. Or I reacted in a way that I wouldn't have reacted. I would have thought it was funny. I would have enjoyed it. But instead I was stressed because I was focused on something else. I don't know about you, but I know for me, that's been something that I've been working on the last few years, where I realized that there were certain things within my own life that were getting to the point where it was so stressful that I was bringing that to other places of my life that it wasn't healthy. I was missing parts of life. And I think there is an aspect where we can get there, where we get so caught up with where we're at this moment and thinking about the things at this time and this place. And if we never step back, we never see what God is creating. You don't hike a mountain without at least stopping somewhat along the way, or at least at the top to see what you did. You don't hike up and then hike right back down and people ask, how was the view up there? And you say, I don't know, I just hiked. You gotta pause, you gotta soak it in, you gotta take it in. We all have had those moments in life where we sit there and we try to slow down time. We try to absorb the moment because we know for whatever reason this is an important moment or something we're really wanting to absorb, or it's going to be a long time before we're able to do something like this again, or it's the last time that we're able to do something like this. I think there's an aspect, is part of human life we should be doing that. Part of what we see within the John text this week is Jesus is trying to say, I'm working on a different scale. Thus, we should be trying to see that scale. Instead, we are often like Pilate and so caught up into what is going on right now. If we are really truly going to see the majesty and the power of who God is, to be able to recognize Christ the King, to be able to recognize the reign of who Christ was, we have to be able to take a step back. We can't go 100 miles an hour and see the power of what Christ has done. We can't. We have to take a break. We have to take a pause. We have to be able to step back. Because when we do that, it allows us the opportunity to start seeing how things are actually coming together. It allows us the opportunity to be able to see all these different things that are going on, being able to see the things that we missed. The psychology is showing that we are laser focused, and we are designed to be laser focused. But we have a God who is saying, yes, I designed you that way for the goals and things that I have for you, but I also designed you to have a relationship with me where I am. And that means you need to take a step back. I took a day off. You can take some time off. And in that time off, I don't want you just busying yourself. I want to be there with you. I want to spend time with you. I want you to see the bigger picture. One of the analogies I've always thought in my head was, I picture life like this big canvas. It's a big painting. And as I move through life, I'm walking down this tapestry slowly but surely and absorbing it all. And I have my flashlight. And I can kind of focus it where I'm at, and I can, shine it back and remember what I was looking at. But it's sometimes hard to really look it forward because it's like, what the heck is that? And sometimes when I get overwhelmed, God flips on the light switch for a moment. So I can see the whole thing for a moment. Can't absorb it, but I can see it. I can remember back, and I look forward and maybe can start making out something. But then it goes dark again. But that means that then I have to be able to absorb that in. I can't speed run it. I can't just run down the tapestry and say I know the whole thing. I have the whole thing. It doesn't work. If we are really going to truly admire who Christ is and recognize the power and go into this season of preparing for Christ's coming, really try to absorb what does that mean and how does my life look different because of that, we got to slow down. We got to take a step back. We got to sit there with God and kind of admire and look and see. Start seeing how things come together. See the invisible gorillas walking through. So the question I have for you this week is, what did you learn this year in your faith? What did you learn this year in your faith? Because I think that's important for us to do. I've teased it a lot. I know when I get to the end of the calendar year, I'll talk a little bit more of what all's gone on with me, but there's been a lot. This has been an interesting year for me, an interesting turn of the calendar, but I wouldn't say it was bad. As I look and reflect, there's been a lot of growth. There's been a lot of challenges. There's been a lot of things where I'm like, what am I doing? Both spiritually and just in my normal everyday life. And I'm not fully sure what all is going on, but I do see that God is still working in it. And I do see the remnants of where God is showing that, yes, this is where I want you to be. And if we're not doing that within our own faith walk, we're missing things then, truly. And that's unfortunate. So this is a week to me that it's difficult. This is one of my least favorite Sundays to talk about. But I also think there is an aspect that it is a very important week for reflection and thinking back and contemplating as we get into the season of that. It can be hard. It can be difficult. But I would also argue it's necessary in order for us to really grow in the faith and really be able to grow. And heck, as a scientist, if you're not being observant enough, you're going to miss things. And we hate doing that as a scientist, because then as a world, we don't grow. We want to grow. Fulfill that desire within you to grow. Make sure that you are growing no matter what age you are. You're never too old to grow. It's figuring out where you're going to grow right now, so we don't have invisible gorillas pop up and we have no idea what everybody is talking about, because we completely missed it. And I don't know about you, but I want to see every possible gorilla that I can see so I can laugh along with God. So, we'll wrap this up as we always do. I pray God blesses you through your faith and amazes you through science.